So I was recently asked this question over email, started to type up my response, and thought to myself, this is an excellent vlog. This is an excellent question to tap into, and especially if you're playing competitive wargaming, looking for any type of advantage, legitimately earned, legitimate advantages. This is kind of something that I've seen over the years, and if I had realized it sooner when I was in that phase of my gaming life, I would have done much better. It would have given me a lot more opportunity. And just like on the Tactica side, there's a lot of little things that players do, completely legal, completely okay, that give them these little advantages. And those little advantages add up tremendously. So what about on the paint side? And we see this in wargaming where you might enter a painting competition at your club, at your store. You put your army, your unit, your model up to judge against. And secondary to that, you might be going to a tournament to play, and part of the scores that are outside of the tournament are best army, best painted, a lot of opportunity, especially if you're a hobbyist. Now, I will say some of what I'm going to put forward, and I'm going to open up the comments, of course, for discussion. I'm not necessarily able to replicate this. I'm not necessarily able to pull this off. I consider myself primarily a tactician, primarily trying to create that tricknology, trying to create that narrative, trying to create that cool stuff on the table. But I do recognize the importance of painted miniatures, and I believe in that. Most of my stuff is, I believe, humbly a little bit above tabletop. But to really, really go and paint something to my best effect and my best level, it takes me a long time. It takes me a long time to do that. And I'm not saying that's not a goal to strive for. I say that because what I'm sharing, it might be outside of my ability, but having played in numerous tournaments, hundreds of tournaments, win or loss doesn't matter. Having been a part of gaming clubs where there's been some amazing, literally golden demon winners, and being able to see that process and being able to see these things looking behind the scenes. So the question was an individual figure. You've gone in to paint that individual figure, and should you make a diorama for it to pull that in? This is an example of kind of, I want to say, soft scores or soft abilities. Absolutely, you should make a diorama for it. Not if it's a single unit, you don't want to put in other models. You might not be able to put in other models. You don't want the diorama to be so big that it overpowers the model. The advice that I've seen others use, well, I shouldn't say advice because they're not necessarily saying it. If you take any type of model, the model itself is limited by physically what it is. I mean, let's talk about 40K. You're going to take a Dreadnought. You're going to take a Land Raider. That's going to be, putting the size difference away for a second, that's going to be vastly different than, say, painting a Librarian. You can paint that Land Raider with rust effects and battle damage and mud all over it, maybe some barbed wire in its treads. That would look vastly different. A Librarian, they're not going to have that on their armor. They're going to be, for some reason, every librarian's an ultramarine in my mind. That GW brainwashing is just absolutely taking hold after all these years. That's not to say you couldn't paint it that way, but then you would be taking away from the natural presentation, the natural highlights of that model. So every model, every individual model that you're going to paint has these characteristics that just naturally have it excelling. You use a diorama, a small diorama to frame it. Could be circular, could be square. The model rests in the middle. You make that diorama naturally fit into the narrative, but you utilize it to pull in effects and paint that you could not do on the model that you're submitting, on your primary model. It would look out of place. An example of that is just off the top of my mind. If I have that librarian kind of there with the psychic powers and stuff, if I make a small diorama, very small, because again, I don't want to overpower it. Think of it as a picture frame. If I make the diorama 3 or 4 steps up, an imperial kind of Gothic chapel, 3 or 4 steps, and the librarian's at the top of those steps, if I could pull in some environmental effects, some water effects, or some smoke effects, depending on my ability, those smoke, environmental, water effects. I say water effects because I think we can all picture them. Those water effects might look strange on the actual model, but as part of a diorama, they wouldn't. And if it blends seamlessly, this is the idea of soft scores and soft influence. Even judges that are very, very knowledgeable about this. This is why really look and see how things are presented. You are going to be able to pull in the positive attributes of that, the visuals, the positive visuals of that diorama, and use it to complement your model. Almost to the point of like, well, the diorama is part of the model. This is also why you don't want it to be so big. You'll see this even with vehicles. You'll see this even with big models. It's not just like, here's a shoebox size or a picture frame display board. Difference between a display board and a diorama. Display board could be a diorama, but often a display board is carrying an entire army. It's very, very busy. So focus on the technique that is the best that you can to develop that diorama. I would stay away from stuff, in my opinion, because I've seen this too. Guys looking for every advantage. And again, these are completely okay, completely legal advantages. They will look to pull in like LED lights or little gimmick type things. And I say that in a positive way because, I mean, to incorporate that and have those effects. The challenge with those effects, they look great on an army display board, but in a diorama, if you have that LED light, so going back to the librarian, I painted the librarian in that blue. I've got the psychic hood, the crystals just zapping off. It looks fantastic. I've got the steps moving up to the Imperial Chapel. Well, that would be a chaplain, but the Imperial, library, whatever. And then there's like a broken pipe and there's some water effects coming out and it's like blasted stone and battle damage. I wouldn't want to put the battle damage on the librarian's armor because then it doesn't make it pop. It doesn't make it look as cool. So now I'm pulling in the best of both, disguising it, presenting it as one model. If I added in, say, an LED, a broken Imperial Eagle and its eye is glowing with an LED, the problem with that is it takes the effect to there and immediately someone knows it's an LED. And they say to themselves, wow, that's awesome. Look at that. Fritz miniaturized that LED in there and it's glowing and it looks awesome. They're focusing on the novelty. You want to draw everything to that model. So I'm not saying don't do it, but over the top effects that pull away from the model, then that's where it draws the focus. So absolutely, I would say yes. I would say 100% have a diorama. The smaller, the better, circular or square. Pull in paints, pull in effects, pull in things that you could not do. It would look out of place on your regular model. Use it also, and we're going to get a little technical, and I'll leave you guys with this. This is something else I noticed over many, many years, especially with Space Marines. And I say Space Marines because there are so many different ways to paint Space Marines. Even with the limitations of, say, the Eldar Craft Worlds, or Eldari, whatever we're going to call them in this edition, there are certain colors that just pop better. And what I noticed, I started to notice this with two players that played Salamander armies. One Salamander army, it wasn't Dark Angels, dark green, kind of army green, but it was a darker type of green, kind of like a Vulcan green. And then another player, and both these armies were painted fantastic. I mean, just blow away anything that I can do. So it's not criticizing that, it's understanding the relation of colors. The other Salamander army was, I won't say fluorescent, but a pop, a very, very pop green color. So it stood out. This is why you see certain armies, even if the technique is the same, someone paints the same armies, certain colors, reds, greens, yellow's hard to paint. Those pop better than black or white. So taking into that account that just visually certain colors are going to grab your attention more, be more vibrant. If you are painting a model that would not necessarily, and this is now maybe moving a little bit outside of 40K and Space Marines, if you're painting a model that might not have colors that really, really pop, for whatever reason, the decisions that you've made to do that, then how can you have the colors pop on your diorama? Again, it's a fine line because you can't have them pop so much that people like miss the model. but utilizing the diorama to frame it and utilize it to pull in techniques that you can't do on that model, and it will subconsciously blend into one and complement. And this is now getting above my pay grade, because to replicate this to different effects, that's not my strength. But this is coming again from someone who has seen many, many armies, what wins, what doesn't, Golden Demon, what wins best painted, what wins player's choice, a lot of the soft influences, and no cheating, no misrepresentation, a lot of these soft influences that when we compare paint skill equal to paint skill, what's that tiebreaker? What pulls that out on top? Or, and I don't mean this as a criticism, if your paint skill is getting there and you're developing it and you're going up against some heavy contenders, even in the same type of competition bracket, what's going to give you that little edge?